Robert Mitchum truly hated him more than anyone. He didn't hate many people, but when Robert Mitchum said he hated someone, he meant it. And the man who pushed him that far? A Hollywood golden boy who thought he was God's gift to cinema, until Mitchum exposed him for what he really was. This is the story of the only actor Robert Mitchum truly couldn't stand, George Peppard. Before Hollywood turned him into a legend, life tried to break him first. Robert Mitchum wasn't born into the spotlight. He crawled out of chaos. He entered the world on August 6, 1917, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. When he was just 2 years old, tragedy struck. His father, a railroad worker, was crushed in an accident. His mother was left to raise 3 kids in the middle of the Great Depression, scraping by in a world that didn't care whether they made it or not. From the beginning, Mitchum learned the hardest lesson of all. Nobody was coming to save him. By his teens, he was already a ghost drifting across America, hitching freight trains, sleeping in boxcars, and getting thrown off in the middle of nowhere. He dug ditches, boxed for spare change, and once ended up on a Georgia chain gang after being arrested for vagrancy. That wasn't a movie scene, that was real life. And yet, it forged something in him. That quiet, stone-faced toughness that would later hypnotize audiences wasn't acting. It was survival. When you've lived through nights where the cold eats at your bones and you've got nothing but a freight car wall to lean on, pretending to be a tough guy isn't a role, it's muscle memory. But here's the part that surprises people. Beneath that hardened shell, Mitchum had a poet's soul. Before fame, he worked as a ghostwriter for an astrologer, and he even wrote poetry himself. He was rough, but he thought deeply. That mix, brute force and philosophy, made him magnetic. He wasn't some Hollywood prototype built for stardom. He was a man who'd already seen the worst of the world, and when the camera finally found him, it couldn't look away. When Robert Mitchum first stepped into Los Angeles, he wasn't dreaming of fame. He just wanted a paycheck that didn't depend on luck or hunger. He took odd jobs, worked in aircraft factories, and even wrote scripts for other people just to keep the lights on. Then one day, like something out of a movie, fate opened a side door. A friend got him a bit part in a small Western film. No big expectations, just another job. But the moment the camera rolled, something changed. Casting directors noticed it first. Mitchum didn't act, he existed. His presence was heavy, dangerous, and real. He wasn't trying to be charming or heroic, he was just being himself. The same drifter who'd survived on the road, and audiences felt it. By 1945, he'd landed his breakout role in The Story of G.I. Joe. His performance was so raw, so grounded, that critics compared him to real soldiers coming home from war. The Academy noticed too. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And just like that, the man who never wanted the spotlight became one of Hollywood's most magnetic leading men. But here's the secret. Mitchum didn't change for Hollywood. He made Hollywood change for him. While other actors rehearsed their smiles and polished their image, Mitchum did the opposite. He leaned into being the outsider, the unshaken, world-weary anti-hero. And that authenticity? It was like oxygen to an audience drowning in fake glamour. Every time he walked on screen, he reminded people of something they didn't see anymore. A man who didn't care about fame, because he'd already met reality. He didn't play the hero, he didn't play the villain. He played the truth, and that scared people. By the late 1940s, Robert Mitchum wasn't just another actor. He was the heartbeat of a new kind of cinema, film noir. Hollywood was used to clean heroes, shiny smiles, and easy endings. Then Mitchum showed up, eyes half-lidded, cigarette burning, voice low and lazy like he knew something the audience didn't. In Out of the Past, 1947, he redefined what a leading man could be. He wasn't noble. He wasn't even particularly good. He was real, a man trapped between morality and temptation, a survivor doing whatever it took to make it through another day. And that was the secret. Robert Mitchum didn't just act noir, he was noir. He embodied the entire post-war disillusionment that America was feeling but couldn't say out loud. People didn't want fairy tales anymore, they wanted honesty. And Mitchum gave it to them like a cold slap of whiskey. While other actors performed emotion, Mitchum simply let it exist. When his character was betrayed, he didn't explode. He blinked once, took a drag, and let silence do the talking. That stillness terrified people because it felt too human. Directors loved him because he never overplayed a scene. He didn't need fancy dialogue to dominate the screen. His eyes did all the work, heavy, haunted, and unpredictable. By the 1950s, he was the king of quiet intensity. He was the man every director wanted and every studio feared, because he didn't belong to anyone. You couldn't script his kind of authenticity. It was born from the road, from hardship, from pain. And yet, despite his reputation as Hollywood's coolest tough guy, Mitchum didn't chase attention. He once said, "Look, I have two kinds of acting, on and off. Both pay about the same." That was his entire philosophy. Effortless, unbothered, and brutally self-aware. When the camera rolled, it was as if time slowed. No music, no shouting, just Robert Mitchum being absolutely still, and somehow saying everything without a single word. When he played evil, people believed it, maybe because a part of him understood it. In 1955, Robert Mitchum took on a role that would forever change how audiences saw him. Reverend Harry Powell in The Night of the Hunter. It wasn't just another part, it was a psychological lightning bolt, the kind of performance that crawled under your skin and stayed there. Powell wasn't just a villain, he was a nightmare wrapped in a preacher's suit, a man who tattooed love and hate across his knuckles, turning his own hands into symbols of God and the devil. He charmed widows, terrified children, and quoted scripture while murdering for money. No one had ever seen a performance like that. Mitchum didn't play the monster as loud or hysterical. He played him soft, calm, almost polite. That's what made it horrifying. He smiled like a saint while whispering like a serpent. Critics were stunned. Directors studied it for decades. Even Martin Scorsese would later call it one of the most haunting performances in movie history. But that was only the beginning. In 1962, Mitchum returned to pure terror as Max Cady in Cape Fear, a role so menacing that even the censors tried to tone it down. Cady was an ex-con seeking revenge, a man so vengeful, so deliberate that every word he spoke felt like a loaded weapon. And again, Mitchum didn't overact it. He underplayed it. Every smirk, every slow turn of the head made your stomach tighten. You never saw him lose control because he didn't need to. He knew the scariest monsters are the ones who never raise their voices. Here's what most people don't realize. Both The Night of the Hunter and Cape Fear reflected who Robert Mitchum really was. Not evil, but deeply aware of it. He understood darkness not because he admired it, but because he'd seen it. In himself, in others, in the world around him. That's why people believed him. He wasn't pretending. He was remembering. Off camera, he joked about it. "People think I'm a tough guy," he said. "I'm just tired." But behind that humor was something real. A man who'd stared into Hollywood's soul and found it just as dangerous as any villain he'd ever played. And the more the industry tried to polish him up, the more he resisted. He wasn't interested in fame. He wanted truth, raw, uncomfortable, and unapologetic. That's what made Robert Mitchum different. He wasn't acting out stories. He was revealing the parts of them most people didn't want to see. While Hollywood was busy pretending, Robert Mitchum was busy not giving a damn. By the 1950s, Robert Mitchum was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Tall, magnetic, and effortlessly cool. But here's what made him different from every other movie star. He didn't want to be one. While other actors were chasing fame, Mitchum was actively running from it. He didn't play the Hollywood game, saksha. He mocked it. He refused to bow, kiss rings, or fake a smile for the cameras. And that terrified the studio system because you can't control a man who doesn't care about losing. He once said, "People think I have this interesting walk. Hell, I'm just holding my gut," and that line summed him up. Brutally honest, funny, and immune to his own legend. Then came 1948, when Hollywood tried to break him. He was arrested for marijuana, a scandal that could have destroyed any other actor's career in that era. The studio executives panicked, newspapers screamed, and his mugshot was plastered everywhere. But the public? They loved him even more. For once, here was a movie star who didn't hide behind fake apologies or carefully crafted PR statements. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't cry on camera. He just shrugged and went right back to work. The arrest only made him more powerful, because it proved what fans already suspected. Robert Mitchum was real. He wasn't a brand. He wasn't a product. He was a man, unpredictable, imperfect, and honest to the bone. And in a town obsessed with image, that made him dangerous. He became Hollywood's quiet rebellion, the living reminder that authenticity will always outshine artifice. He smoked, he cursed, he showed up late, But when the camera started rolling, nobody was better. Even his co-stars couldn't figure him out. He never rehearsed, rarely over-explained his process, and could deliver a perfect take with what looked like zero effort. One director called him the laziest genius alive. But here's the truth. Robert Mitchum wasn't lazy. He was free. And in an industry built on control, freedom was the ultimate scandal. Every outlaw needs an anchor. For Robert Mitchum, her name was Dorothy. Long before the fame, long before the lights of Los Angeles ever hit his face, Robert Mitchum met a girl by a quiet swimming hole in Delaware. Her name was Dorothy Spence. He was 16, wild, restless, already halfway gone from home. She was 14, calm, kind, and unshakably grounded. It shouldn't have worked. But somehow it did. Where he was fire, she was water. Where he was chaos, she was calm. And in a world that would later try to own him, Dorothy was the only one who never asked him to be anyone else. Their love started the old-fashioned way: letters, distance, and faith. While Robert drifted across the country, Dorothy stayed in Delaware, finishing school and quietly believing in him. Even when he was broke, sleeping under train bridges, she never let go. Years later, when he finally made it to California, she joined him. And they got married in the most un-Hollywood way imaginable. In a Methodist parson's kitchen, no guests, no glitz, no photographers. Just two people who meant it. As Robert Mitchum rose to fame, the marriage stayed steady, not perfect, but real. He was difficult, unpredictable, sometimes impossible, but she didn't try to tame him. She understood him. And in a business where everyone wanted a piece of him, Dorothy was the one person who never did. They built a quiet life behind the madness. 3 children, laughter, and loyalty that outlasted scandal and temptation. Their sons, James Mitchum and Christopher Mitchum, both followed their father into acting, carrying pieces of that same calm fire with them. Their daughter, Patrine, chose writing, chronicling the truth about her father's world, both its brilliance and its darkness. Through every movie set, every headline, every whispered rumor, Dorothy stood by him, a still point in a life that spun fast. And when the cameras stopped, that's who Robert came home to. Not the Hollywood elite, not the parties, but the woman who'd known him since before the fame, before the myth, before the man called the coolest actor alive even existed. By the time the world crowned him a legend, Robert Mitchum already knew where his real story lived. Not in front of the camera, but beside Dorothy, in the quiet. She wasn't his accessory. She was his compass, and that made their marriage one of Hollywood's rarest things. Something real. Every kingdom needs a successor. But what happens when the new prince tries to dethrone the king? By the early 1960s, Robert Mitchum had become more than a movie star. He was an idea. The blueprint for cool, the man other men wanted to be. But Hollywood has one rule: no throne stays empty for long. That's when George Peppard walked in. He was younger, sharper, and dangerously ambitious. Blonde hair, steel blue eyes, that crisp Midwestern confidence. Peppard wasn't just another actor. He was a man who believed he was born for greatness. When he broke out in Breakfast at Tiffany's 1961, opposite Audrey Hepburn, the industry whispered the same thing. "We found the next Robert Mitchum." And that's exactly what made the air crackle between them. Mitchum by then was the old lion, calm, scarred, and unimpressed. Peppard was the young wolf, hungry to prove he could take his place. Their paths collided when both were cast in the same movie circle, orbiting each other like two planets too close to the sun. Peppard admired Mitchum, at first. He studied him, mimicked that low, effortless delivery, the slow way Mitchum could dominate a scene without moving an inch. But admiration turned to competition. Behind closed doors, people started whispering. Peppard was difficult, proud, defiant, and unwilling to play second fiddle to anyone. Mitchum didn't say much. He never had to, but he noticed. On set, the tension was electric. Mitchum, with his trademark smirk, could silence a room with one glance. Peppard, fueled by ego and youth, tried to match it, and sometimes pushed too hard. There were no screaming fights, no public breakdowns, just a quiet war of presence. Every scene became a duel. Every silence became a standoff. People who worked with them later said it was like watching two predators in the same cage. One experienced enough to wait, the other desperate to strike. And in the middle of it all, Hollywood held its breath. Because when legends collide, somebody has to fall. Fame makes men. Ego destroys them. The real story of Robert Mitchum and George Peppard wasn't just about rivalry. It was about legacy. Two men standing at opposite ends of the Hollywood timeline, one carved from survival, the other sculpted by ambition. In 1966, they both found themselves working on the Blue Max, a World War I drama drenched in testosterone, pride, and moral conflict. It was a perfect mirror for what was happening behind the scenes. Mitchum, the seasoned veteran, moved through production like a ghost, efficient, silent, unbothered. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He was the proof. Peppard, meanwhile, arrived like a storm, confident, outspoken, and obsessed with perfection. He was methodical to the point of madness, wanting every line, every gesture, every shadow to fall exactly right. But in the process, he made enemies, especially older actors who saw too much of themselves in his impatience. Mitchum didn't confront him, he just watched. When Peppard complained about lighting or dialogue, Mitchum would light a cigarette, exhale slowly, and mutter, "Kid, it's just a movie." That line burned deeper than any insult. Because for Peppard, it wasn't just a movie, it was everything. He needed to win. Mitchum? He'd already stopped keeping score. The press, of course, ate it up. They painted it as a clash between generations, the rebellious king of old Hollywood versus the sharp-edged prince of the new age. And maybe they were right. The difference was spiritual. Robert Mitchum had earned his cynicism, through hunger, through loss, through life itself. George Peppard was still chasing validation, the applause, the fame, the illusion of being the next big thing. As the film wrapped, everyone on set could feel it. Something had shifted. Peppard looked exhausted, as if the performance had drained him dry. Mitchum, on the other hand, looked exactly the same. Calm, amused, untouchable. He'd survived the studio system, the scandals, the critics, and he'd just survived George Peppard too. Years later, when Peppard's career began to fade and Mitchum's legend only grew stronger, people looked back and realized what they had witnessed wasn't rivalry. It was a passing of power. Mitchum didn't fight for it. He didn't need to. Because real power doesn't shout. It waits, and it lasts. He had the looks, the talent, and the spotlight. But what he didn't have was peace. For a while, George Peppard looked unstoppable. He had conquered television, starred in blockbusters, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed destiny was on his side. But destiny, in Hollywood, always comes with fine print. Behind the cameras, Peppard's ambition began to eat him alive. He wasn't just chasing success, he was chasing control. Every scene, every script, every co-star had to bend to his will. He wanted perfection, but perfection doesn't exist in an industry built on illusion. Directors called him brilliant but impossible. Producers called him a nightmare. And co-stars, well, they stopped calling altogether. By the early 1970s, the same fire that had fueled his rise was burning everything around him. His marriage fell apart, his reputation soured, and that unstoppable charm? It started to look more like arrogance. He clashed with studios, walked off sets, and turned down roles that could have saved his career. The man who once stood next to Robert Mitchum as Hollywood's next alpha was now drifting, fighting everyone, including himself. There's a famous story from that time, Peppard standing in a half-empty bar telling a friend, "They used to say I was the next big thing, but nobody tells you what happens after the big thing." The irony? He still had the talent, but Hollywood doesn't wait for redemption. And by the time Peppard realized what he'd lost, the machine had already moved on. He spent the next decade bouncing between TV roles and half-forgotten movies, until the A-Team gave him one final shot at immortality. As Colonel John Hannibal Smith, Peppard became iconic again. The cigar, the grin, the catchphrase, "I love it when a plan comes together." But even then, behind the smile, the same darkness lingered. He fought with co-stars, battled alcohol, and could never fully silence that inner voice that whispered, "You should have been more." When the lights dimmed for good, George Peppard wasn't remembered as the man who lost, but as the man who couldn't let go. He wanted to be eternal, but Hollywood doesn't grant eternity. It only gives you a moment, and Peppard's moment had passed. While others chased fame, Robert Mitchum chased truth. And somehow, truth always outlives the noise. As George Peppard's star faded, Robert Mitchum remained, steady, unbothered, eternal. He aged like an oak tree, rough, weathered, but impossible to ignore. He never begged for attention. He never reinvented himself. He just was. By the 1980s and 90s, Mitchum had become Hollywood's living ghost, the man who'd seen it all, outlasted them all, and still carried that same lazy half-smile that said, "You kids take it too seriously." He worked when he wanted to, turned down when he didn't, and laughed at everything else. When asked about fame, he said, "Hell, fame's just a byproduct. You do the job, you get paid, you go home. Everything else is noise." That attitude, that fearless detachment, made him timeless. He appeared in classics like Farewell, My Lovely, and The Big Sleep, proving that the soul of noir never really dies. And when younger actors asked him for advice, he'd shrug and say, "Don't act. Just be in an industry built on pretending." Mitchum's refusal to pretend made him immortal. But here's the part most people never saw. Behind the myth, he was a husband, a father, a man who valued quiet over fame. He spent his last years surrounded by family, not fans, by laughter, not lights. When reporters tried to dig for drama, he gave them dry jokes instead. He didn't need sympathy. He'd already made peace with the world a long time ago. When Robert Mitchum passed away in 1997, the world didn't just lose an actor, it lost a mirror, a reflection of a time when men were allowed to be complicated, flawed, and real. The industry tried to make new Mitchums after him, but none of them ever lasted. Because you can't manufacture what he had. It wasn't charm, it wasn't style, it was truth. Raw, defiant, unpolished truth. And that's why, even now, decades later, when you watch him on screen, it still hits different. He doesn't perform. He doesn't convince. He reminds you that the most powerful man in any room is the one who doesn't need it. Robert Mitchum, the man who outlived the myth because he never tried to become one.